So my name is Ben Grunow. I'm a photographer. What type of photographer? I love landscape photography, but I do all sorts of different kinds of photography. I'm from Vermont. I live on a small farm, and I built my own house, and I love to show people different places that I've been, and that's kind of the whole reason I actually started taking photos. I was born in Switzerland and got to travel a lot as an athlete, as a skier when I was a young kid. And I would go all these cool places, and I'm like, how the heck do I show people like what I'm looking at? Like, obviously take a picture, but I figured out that taking photos, it's not always what your eye sees, I mean, you take a picture and it's not what you're looking at. Our eyes see 22 stops of dynamic range. No camera can do it. No camera's there yet, so. No matter what, every time you're taking a picture, you're still not going to get your 22 stops of dynamic range like your eyeball sees. So when I go out and shoot, I really am trying to accomplish what my eyeball sees when I'm out there. We shot a little video with Lumix last year in Switzerland, where I was born. And this is kind of just a little bit of synopsis on my style of shooting, and then we can go into some images, and I'll show you guys in Photoshop how I blend exposures and try to stay away from HDR, but I do like the dynamic range. I was born in Grunow. It's my hometown. My father lives here, my family's here. It's kind of inspired me to be a photographer. I've always wanted to share the beauty of it with everybody, and I mean, that's why I started taking landscape photos. I was always in these really cool places, and I really wanted to share the experience with everybody, and I wanted to show people what I saw with my eyes. Well, at the moment we've got a lot of fog rolling through these beautiful hills, but the clouds will clear at some point. It's just the matter of how much time we want to wait. Poof, voila, it finally cleared through. It was great. Weather is always an issue, and you can't control the weather. I'm always trying to seek out a remote place. I truly like to find a place that's untouched and uncivilized, so to say. It's unbelievable how lightweight the camera systems are. I mean, in my bag I've got 2 camera bodies, 8 lenses. Lightweight is very important because every single ounce you carry is, how much further you can go. Sometimes the tripod isn't always handy, so with dual IS you can handheld exposures even up to a second, and you're still gonna get a clean, tack-sharp image. Definitely made some friends here. We've got the beautiful Eiger right here, who's finally shown her face. And look at those beautiful wispy clouds on top. I've been shooting with the 8-18. It's a new lens from Lumix. It's definitely the go-to lens for all landscapes. It happens to be my favorite lens that I've ever shot with, for sure. Well, this pond was supposed to be filled with water, and I was hoping to get some reflection shots, and instead we've got a dried up pond with a little bit of water in it and tons of crackly dried up salt, which looks really cool. I do a little bit of exposure blending, and I auto bracket everything in the camera, and it's nice to have it at my fingertips. So cool. My advice for people that want to shoot landscapes is, first of all, pack light. Second of all, get somewhere where nobody is, and shoot wide, shoot super wide. And I mean, not always, but it's a good place to start. I don't know what I would do with a different camera up here, I mean, I used to carry around a lot of different accessories for my cameras to do what I wanted them to do, but nowadays everything's built right into this Lumix camera. So again, the way I'm talking in this video a little bit too is, I use a Panasonic. It's a lightweight camera system. Lumix has come out with all the technology that's coming out in other camera systems is amazing as well, but I'm a firm believer that lightweight is super key. When I'm hiking and camping, if I don't have room for water or lunch, I'm really not getting that far. I better have a big breakfast or I'm not staying overnight. I'm not going to take night photos, so on and so forth. So for me, the biggest thing, with a camera system is how much shit can I bring, really, do I need this other lens? Do I need my fast lens? Am I going to also be zooming? Is there going to be some wildlife? So for me, the largest thing in photography and the most advancements I've had in my photography is being able to go all these places and not have to carry around giant rocks, so to say. I used to shoot other camera systems, and I've since gotten rid of them on my own choice. I'm not Lumix isn't you've got to shoot Panasonic. I can shoot any sort of camera I want. But why would I? I get it. If you're going to print something that's 16 feet big, you can still do it with a small camera system because it's viewing distance. And that's a really important thing to keep into consideration as well. We'll start going through some slides. Some photos you'll see maybe are older, maybe are a little bit more HDR'd. There's a couple different trips to Switzerland that are in this. There's also some photos from India and some photos from Iceland. If you guys do have any questions as we're going through the photos, on how I got it, please just raise your hand and, yell, I guess. But HDR is high dynamic range, and basically by saying HDR, it's multiple exposures of different EV brackets, brighter and darker, and basically the software squishes it. And I like to auto bracket images and then hand blend them together afterwards because you don't get such a contrasted, saturated, if anything, I try to desaturate. This has some saturation. So inside my camera, most cameras do it, some don't. In all the Lumixes, you can auto bracket. And if you're unfamiliar with what auto bracketing is, it's basically taking multiple EV spaces, so darker and lighter, neutral exposed images, and saving them all separately. So usually you want to shoot that on a tripod. But if you don't have a tripod, there's all sorts of new in-camera stabilization stuff now. It's gotten to the point where I'm confident enough I can go out without a tripod unless I'm shooting a night photo and hold the camera on my knee or just hold it, burst mode my auto brackets, and I don't even need the tripod anymore because Photoshop will line them right up, and I'm confident enough that it'll line up right on top. And again, so here's a glacier in Switzerland. I've got a long exposure here. If I were to shoot this with one exposure, unless I had a graduated neutral density, this is a little bit of a darker situation. So I could get away with it and still actually get just a little bit of cloud detail here, but it's not the best example. This is the Rhone Gletscher in Switzerland. And again, if I were to shoot this to actually expose correctly for this water and even want to think about any clouds in here, I would have to either put a graduated neutral density filter on it, or I'd have to auto bracket it and then combine it. The Lumix cameras also, you can combine them in the camera. You can focus stack in the camera. Other camera bodies have that too. Does anybody not know what focus stacking is? So cool, only one? Great. So focus stacking is taking different planes of the focal field and combining them into one image, so that if you're shooting at 1.7 in your foreground and you shoot a different aperture for the background, and then you can combine them so that you can see what your eye actually sees, because same thing with your eyeball, it sees a whole lot more than any camera can. Same deal, this is more of a better example of actually being able to expose the foreground and the background at the same time. So What I do is I set my camera up on a tripod, I set it to auto bracket, I give it a second to delay or 2 seconds of a delay, and the camera just slaps off 7 pictures. I shoot it in RAW and JPEG sometimes. And it's almost like I'm future-proofing, so to say, my images, because no matter what, I've got these different EV spaces I can always find and always take different amounts of light and darkness out of images. And if the way I edit in the future changes, or if anything, so to say, happens, it's almost like future-proofing your photo library in a way. I can't tell you how many times I go through my photos and I'm like, oh, wow, like I've been auto bracketing for 7, 8 years now. And I started off with just doing a +1 and a -1 and a neutral exposed image. And I'm going back in these old images that I've shot and didn't know how to combine or didn't know what to do with, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is an amazing image. Like, if I combine these 2 lights and darknesses, this is really cool. And so we're also talking, is it a composite image or is it not a composite image? It's on a tripod and you're not moving the scene. So like, yeah, traditionally it's a composite, but it's really actually the scene that you saw and it's closer to your eyeball. As long as you remember what you saw and match it to your eye. I'll go into Photoshop in a little bit and I'll show you guys how I grab 2 auto brackets and super quickly blend them together. There's a million different ways to do it. You can get crazy technical with luminosity masks and so on and so forth. And the same thing goes for focus stacking. All this stuff can be done in camera as well now, but I find that it's a little better to do it afterwards in post. But if I am going for a quick image, so like for this, if I were ever to expose properly for the sky in the back here, you wouldn't be able to see this barn. There's no way. There's no way you could see the barn. If I used a graduated neutral density filter there, I mean, maybe if I turned it a little and put it right on the shadow line of where the mountain is here, all through here, then I might be able to get away with it, but you'd still see an obvious line. This is actually the line of, where the sun's going down. So to me, I just took 2 images, one that was exposed better for, the foreground in here. Obviously, I got a big sunspot, but I was driving in the car, stopped real quick. The sun was going down. I had no time to do anything. My camera's set on auto bracket. Make sure it's still bam, 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 like bam, 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 bam again, and no matter what, I think I shot it four times out of the car, stopped on the side of the road because the light was changing so quick. And no matter what, afterwards, I brought it home. I was like, oh, this picture's going to be sweet. It's going to be awesome. Like, I know I took a sweet picture. And I tried to edit it, and it didn't work out, and I just forgot about it. And I went back to it months and months after, and sure enough, it was super easy to just line up the right ones if I had a little bit, And I'm talking, I've done 5 minutes of editing to this photo. I'm not sitting on my computer all night. Like, I'm not trying to over-edit my images and, wisp out every line, I want to get what I saw, and I want to get it quick, and I don't want to spend too much time on post. I want to get it right in the camera, but I also want to have these different EV spaces of what my eyeballs saw. I recommend starting auto bracketing on whatever mode you shoot on and whatever mode you're comfortable with. And then when you do learn from there, you can switch your modes, but that's the same thing in photography anyways. Like, I want to be shooting manual a lot of the time, but that's just because I know what I want, and I'm trying to see it, first. But then, that stuff usually never, ever works out the way you want it to. You're like, there's this iconic place, I'm going there, I've seen all these shots from there, and I'm going to try to shoot it better than the other guy. And that to me is boring. I want to go to a place that nobody's shot, that is completely different and means something to me, And again, this is Switzerland. This is another example of, if I were to shoot just one picture of this path, to get this exposed here correctly of the color, the sky would not be that blue. It just wouldn't be. Even with a polarizer, it still wouldn't be that blue. You wouldn't be able to see this lake. It would be bright. Same thing here. I absolutely, obviously love Switzerland. I was born there. You guys saw the video, but every time I go, I'm from a really small zone there, and you know, it's a 30-mile zone that I've gone to twice a year for my entire life. I still haven't shot at all. There's still more shit out there that I like have to shoot. You know, every time I go there, I'm like, oh my gosh, this was right around the corner. And I find that with a lot of places that I do go back to. But that's just because it's me. If you guys have any place that's special to you, there's always other things to shoot, no matter what. These are white Ension. Not that anybody knows, but they're super, super rare to find a white Ension. They're usually a more blue color. Edelweiss is the Swiss flower. And again, I travel around with a wide angle lens, a mid-size zoom lens, and a really small macro lens. And that's like in a little tiny little pouch that I can put around my shoulder, you know? And obviously I usually take a backpack because I want lunch or I want to bring my tent. And I need at least a gallon of water, so. But if I'm going on day trips, you know, sometimes I'll pack 6 lenses and 2 different camera bodies right into the bag and still have room for lunch because I'm not carrying my one lens that weighs 8 pounds. I do find Edelweiss very uniquely beautiful. These are Steinbock or European Ibex. So you saw those pictures a little bit before, that path, and you know, I was explaining about the light and the lake, how it was super blue there. The fog rolled in, I started to hike down. I hiked 8 hours to get to that spot earlier that you saw, and the clouds started rolling in, and I was really shooting to come up to shoot these Steinbock because I had heard that there was a huge crew of them up there. Steinbock, Ibex, but Ibex in America are white, and Steinbock in Europe are this darker color, more like a goat. These guys are actually, their age is measured by these little tiny spikes that grow every single year. So that defines their age, which is really cool. My dad's a mountain guide. My whole family's lived there for years, and this group of Steinbock that I stumbled upon after being like, ugh, happened to be some of the oldest ones that I've ever seen. And you know, I'm shooting a 1:400 lens on micro 4/3, so we're talking a 200 to 800 equivalent, right? And fog's there. You know, these guys are scared of me. They're like, they don't want people around them, obviously. So I'm like, I got to think really fast. I got to get my camera up to super high ISO. And so when I learned photography shooting action sports. Snowboarding, skiing, white light, fast movement, all the time. So when when I'm able to shoot like an animal or something like that, it does come easy to me, but it has been a learning curve. Because these things are moving and you're shooting. If you've been hiking for 7 hours and you're sweating and you're tired and I didn't have a monopod, I had my tripod, I ripped it out as quick as I possibly could. You know, I'm zoomed in, I'm trying to move every single different angle. I shot maybe 200 photos of these guys and I maybe had 5 minutes to shoot them. And I ran around the whole crew basically got as close as I could before they kind of started to get a little aggressive, but because they pack up, and if you're one human, you know, they're not afraid of you. That's the path I ended up hiking down. It was 7 hours to get here and about 4 hours to get back down to the lake because it zigzagged over these cliffs. And this is a female. All the other large-horned ones are males. I actually have some other shots of them scratching themselves with their horns, but I didn't include that, so we'll save you guys that. It's interesting, but So just before these guys kind of charged me / then ran down the hill, this was the biggest one that I was literally trying to circle to get photos of because his rack was the biggest. He's the oldest. I think it was 20 plus years on this guy. But again, you know, in the 5 minutes of me running around after 7 hours, and it was an opportunity of a lifetime for me because usually these guys are high in the cliffs and the mountains. They're not in the grassy areas, and they're not in somewhere that's like, you know, they're vulnerable. They're super vulnerable here. So I did get very lucky. And there again, you can see, you know, how old this guy is. And that's literally me just being like, okay, I need to bump my ISO up. I need a faster shutter speed. And then as I'm doing it in the camera, looking, not taking my finger off the eyepiece, pressing play real quick, and then back to firing, and a quick little twist. And that's the only, if I had tried to do it 5-10 years ago, there's no way I would have maybe gotten one tack sharp image. And that also has a lot to do with in-camera stabilization, 5-axis, which, again, like I was saying, I shoot these bracketed images. It's gotten to the point that now I'm like, okay, well, I'll just like hold it still and slap it off, and I don't even need my tripod, you know? And if we're talking shooting some water scenes or night photography, then obviously I'm going to need a tripod for something that's over a second or 2 seconds. So again, this is not a normal landscape for these Steinbock to be hanging out in. There's nowhere for them to like run to the cliffs. But these guys are crazy. You'll be hiking in the mountains, like, you know, with a 4,000-foot drop. You're on like a little tiny 2-foot path, and they're up above you, and they see you, and they're like, oh, it's humans, and they start kicking rocks at you, you know? I mean, these guys are endangered. I love them. They're beautiful. I don't think they're all, I really like them, you know? But they're smart. They're very smart. And they know that we're taking over. So again, this 5 minutes, all these guys are literally all in this, like, they're all in this room here, and I'm just like, prr, 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 run, like 10 feet, like, prr, 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 you know? And that's how I got all these different images, but it literally was an elapsed amount of maybe possibly 5-10 minutes. So this again is like, we'll get away from the Steinbock now, now that I've told you guys all about my favorite animals. This is a focus stacked image, but also it's exposure blended. So I focus stacked, that one was done all in camera. So basically what the camera does is it's got all these different points of focus, which you guys see in your cameras, right? And it will rip through all those different focus points with an electronic shutter and shoot all of them. And then in the camera, you just press combine, or you can press which planes you want to combine, or you can pick your focus areas, and you can press done, and then everything's in focus front to back, which is what I do also in post, but sometimes I do it in post because I'm trying to manipulate it a little bit more. But again, this is done all in camera. So I shoot with the GH5. All this stuff that you're seeing is mostly GH4, GH5. I'm only use the G9 now, which is a more photographer-based camera that we have. It just doesn't have as many bells and whistles as the GH5 for video. I mean, the GH5 is, any of these small camera systems can do everything and print everything that a larger camera system can do. That's just a fact, you know? I mean, and some people can argue it, and that's fine. This is a little bit more HDR'd because I just added a lot more contrast. But again, you know, I would never be able to expose for the sky and the foreground here in one exposure. I could possibly do it with a neutral density filter, but then I started to stop liking those lines. And when you do get into blending, or if you do get into processing it in the camera, it's a lot less HDR-esque. So this shot is from, I think, the GH4 and maybe 3 or 4 years ago, so that's why it does look a lot more saturated. I'm constantly learning. I'm never going to know everything. Nobody's an expert. You know, I mean, everybody is constantly learning in everything they're doing. So I feel like I'm always going to be continuing and trying to figure out new techniques and new ways to get what my eye saw. So first I'll take I'll neutral exposure, right? I'll try to get the best possible neutral exposure in the camera. I'll even pre-curve it in my camera. You know, I can put curve settings on my camera before I even shoot the picture. I'd go for the best neutral exposed image. And then depending on how much light differences there is in my frame that I've chosen, so if it's super bright over here and super dark over here, then you know I'm going to shoot probably one EV space, you know, and then I might even go back and make, if this makes sense, I might make -3 my neutral EV space, and then shoot another 7 bracketed, or I'll shoot it at 2/3 of an EV space. And again, that all depends on how much light and how much dark is in your picture. I mean, when it's cloudy, obviously you don't have that much craziness in the light differences. So these are those Encion again. This is a normal colored Encion. I showed you guys a white one earlier. If you guys, I'll give anybody $100 if you can find one. I mean, I'd give a lot more, but maybe you guys are all going to go to Switzerland and start trying to cash out on $100 bills on me. So. Again, you know, this is nothing crazy, just was really cool to me when I saw it, you know? I mean, that's, to anybody else, probably absolutely ridiculous. But to me, when I was there, it's exactly the way I remembered it, and I get the feeling of when I saw it, like, while I'm looking at it. And that's why I shoot photos, you know? Same thing here. And then again on this image, I was just set my tripod up, press the button. I was going to try to put a neutral density filter on it. I think I did put a neutral density filter on it just to get a little bit more like stringy water flow, you know, and a longer exposure. But this was the first one I shot, and I just picked 2 separate EV spaces, and I literally just ripped the eraser right through the dark part because I had them layered on top of each other in Photoshop. I mean, the camera all does this in itself as well, but you can't be so, you know, you shoot 3 pictures and you get an HDR, and that's more HDR, and I'm trying to go for more of the dynamic range. You guys saw this lady earlier in the video. I have sheep at home. I've got a milking cow too. She's actually going to give birth in the next couple weeks, which is pretty cool, so I'm going to start milking my cow, I guess. I built my own timber frame the last few years. I'm always I try to do everything myself, but sometimes it bites me in the ass. Again here, you know, I bracketed this image. There was so many different, this whole area up here was so dark, and you can see it in the reflection that it's so dark, but if I hadn't bracketed it, I wouldn't even been able to see any blue sky here. You wouldn't even been able to see this ridge of the mountain. And again, you know, this is nothing crazy, but to me, when I was there, it looks exactly the way I saw it, and that was my achievement, you know. And this is in camera. I mean, so you know, tell me how you're going to get these buttercups here in focus and the mountains in focus in the back. Like, yeah, you can shoot f/22, but is that a good idea? You know. You're going to be a lot longer exposure, right? So you're getting a lot more noise, right? Or, you know. So this is all electronic shutter. You know, I could blow this picture up to 4 feet. It'd still be sharp, still be super sharp. And all I did was literally press the button to focus stack in the camera, and it was done. This picture, the camera probably picked this whole plane back here. It probably picks a couple here in the foreground. I'm sure it probably got a little confused with these little pieces of grass flying around, so it didn't choose those. And then it chose some foreground spots that actually focused well on it. I mean, the EV is so fast that it jumps right around, you know, and it will just record all of it. And then you can choose afterwards. You can be like, okay, well, I want to click this swath and have it focus stacked together, and this part. And then you just press the button and it saves it on your camera roll and on your card and you're done. Same thing with this. This is not in camera. This was a little harder to do because I didn't want to use electronic shutter. I really wanted to get the highest quality I could. But if I'm going to shoot the foreground of black, dark mud with no light on it, it's pretty hard. You got to shoot a long exposure to even see it. And then if I were to shoot this long exposure, everything from the lake just looks like a big, bright, white light. So that's not what I saw. Same thing here. And then again, same thing here. It was super cloudy and moody in this spot, and you'd think that why would you need to auto bracket that, or why would you even want to? Who cares? Just shoot it the way it is. But again, you can't tell. You can tell a little bit in my blending here, but it was so bright coming through here that it washed out everything else. And just this little bit of brightness above the glacier, it was impossible to shoot a single exposure with it and actually make it look like what I saw. So I basically used an exposure that looked super, super dark for what was behind the glacier, and then added a separate one that was really dark for the sky so I could actually see the contrast of the clouds, and then a separate one that was maybe more neutral exposed for the middle. This one's focus stacked right in the camera. I held the camera. In the video, I took this picture, actually. I was just literally holding the camera still, pressed it. It's all electronic shutter, so you don't hear noise, and it shoots all the EV spaces, combines it right in the camera, and done. I mean, getting your picture right, obviously, first, right off the bat, is the most important. Understanding your camera, understanding all your settings is super important. But to actually achieve what your eye saw, you kind of got to start exploring a little bit and getting out of your comfort zone. And then again, so this is focus stacked, but I did this not in camera. I did this post. And this is handheld. I handheld, shot a separate focus, and so the way I did this was I'm always shooting 7 EV spaces, always. So, and again, if I'm losing you on the whole EV space, it's different exposures. I'm shooting minus exposures, positive exposures, neutral exposures. So I held the camera and I focused right. I pressed the button on the touch screen. I get my constant preview, which is actually what it's going to look like. I don't know if you guys know what constant preview is, but it's like cheating. It's you hold the camera and up, and it's the picture you're going to get. It's great. So that's what I did, and literally clicked on the LCD screen on the flowers, whap, 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 and then just moved my finger up a little bit, clicked on the background, whap, 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 whap. I took 2 pictures, combined them together in Photoshop. It probably took me 3 or 4 minutes, and I think it's a beautiful image. I mean, it's one of my favorite images from this trip. So these are all single exposures. That's multiple exposures, and black and white looked a lot better because I was losing some saturation just because there's so much color difference. Same thing here. How could I get the mountains? How could I get the clouds? And actually this dark, dark rock that's in the shadow on the bottom right. It's not possible. That's a single exposure. This is just playing around with selective color. Inside the glacier, how the heck could I see outside of the glacier and shoot a photo and see the inside of the glacier, which is what I saw when I was in the glacier? When you do it in the camera, it really does a great job. But when you start, practicing it outside of the camera to combine, you really have to work with it a little bit, and you have to actually get every single focal plane, if that makes sense. And then also be selective. If you notice too that spot's weird, then you got to go back and make sure you haven't moved your tripod and get that section down. The crazy face in the ice, I think. Does anybody see the face? Yeah, here I was. I thought I wasn't going to have. I could probably talk for 3 hours. So, this is multiple exposures. These are Edelweiss. Edelweiss are the Swiss endangered flower. to be able to find a place that you can shoot north or shoot south the Milky Way at the perfect time of night and find edelweiss that are endangered is pretty ridiculous. It was like a hardcore goal of mine to shoot Milky Way with edelweiss, and I showed all my friends this picture afterwards. They're like, cool, Ben. I'm like, no, you don't understand how hard, you don't understand how hard it is to find edelweiss that are naturally growing and to be able to see the Milky Way, Now we're into Iceland a little bit. I'll just rip through so you guys at least can see the pictures, because that'll make me feel better. Yeah, I mean, so when we're talking moving subjects, you can. Don't get me wrong. You're shooting more for something moving, and then you can wait for that thing to get out of the scene, and then as long as you haven't moved the camera, you can shoot the scene. When I'm trying to focus, stack, auto bracket to blend on something moving, I make sure I'm on a tripod. I shoot what's moving first, and then I go do all the other stuff. Iceland's crazy beautiful place. $200 round trip ticket from here. Does anybody work for Iceland Air or WoW Air? Maybe they could hook me up. Yep. This is in last March. And then again, this is exposure blending. So I shot perfectly for the aurora, and then this whole mountain range was dark. I'm like, I want to see the mountains. I want to see what the mountains look like too. And that just, if the aurora is brighter, then it will illuminate the mountains. But then you're talking a different color hue, and you got to fix that, and it goes on. And same thing with this. I wouldn't be able to shoot, get any sort of color out of this foreground and the blue sky if I hadn't auto bracketed. The twilight of the changing aurora. This is a long exposure that's auto bracketed. Because how could I get the sky like that and this piece of ice in the foreground with the rocks and... So here, I'll do this real quick. This is a picture I'll show you guys in Photoshop just because I know we're running out of time. This is out the hotel window, I'm like, oh man, I just missed the sunset, but I gotta try to shoot it and make it cool. So I put my camera out the window, auto bracket, bam, 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 bam. And I had different EV spaces. But if we go into Photoshop, this is how the sky exposure looked, right? Can you see the buildings? No, I dodge and burn too. I could, dodge and burn that out and maybe bring these buildings back to life. But, it's easier for me to shoot a different EV space, but I can't see my sky now, right? That sucks. Well, since I auto bracketed it, I can just cut and copy, and since I knew it was on the same plane, that's great. This is super, super, super simple. There's a million different ways to do this. There's luminosity masks. It can get super crazy. You can spend a lot of time. I've tried to make it down to a real quick, slap it on top of each other, erase out. This is where you guys need to start if you've never done this. And, I've got a brush with my opacity eraser. Maybe jack that up a little bit. And, that's more what my eye saw. Right? So that's why I always auto bracket. And that's why I feel like I'm future-proofing. Yeah, so and again, there's a million different ways to do that. This is the easiest, simplest way for somebody to understand and start to do it. Just go on Google and don't make your head explode, though. Thank you, guys.